This is Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. Hello, welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles, and this is the show where we explore the riches of our Catholic faith and how it informs our daily lives. Today we welcome Michael Voris. Michael is founder and president of St. Michael's Media and senior executive producer at churchmilitant.tv, described as media enterprises established to address the serious erosion of the Catholic faith in the last 50 years. He's here to talk a little bit about his conversion story, a very powerful story. If you haven't heard it, you don't want to miss it, as well as some other issues of concern in the church today, including the crisis of manhood and authentic masculinity in the church and things like that. So, Michael, great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. Good to be here.
You got a pretty beautiful conversion story. It revolves around the love and sacrifice of your mother. But let's go back to the beginning. You were raised in a Catholic home. You had Catholic parents. You went to Catholic school. How was the catechesis?
It was pretty good up until, I would say, probably fourth grade. I remember I was taught by the Daughters of Charity, and I remember Sister Bernadette in third grade. She was very solid. I remember some of the things of her saying in class that's still with me right now. And then it started to get a little lackluster, I guess, then. This was in the early 1970s, and it was just about the time here in the United States where you were seeing nuns as well as priests, leave their vocations. And I think that kind of hit this particular community a little bit hard. My first grade year, everyone teaching was nuns. And by the time I got to my eighth grade year, there were only 3 classes left with nuns. And so that all happened in the space of 8 years. So it was a pretty rapid decline. When I got to high school, forget it. We were taught by the Christian Brothers, and all we heard was, kind of like pop psychologists and that sort of thing. So it wasn't, there really wasn't anything. And then on to Notre Dame. We got something good in elementary school. We got sort of roughly neutral in high school. And in college, we sort of got the anti-faith taught to us. It was actually pretty severe. There was only one class that I took that you could even, in religion and theology at Notre Dame, that you could ever even really consider as Catholic. But the rest of it was crazy. We actually had a professor tell us once that St. Bernadette Subaru suffered from delusions of grandeur, which is quite a statement to make about a saint at all, but particularly to make about a saint on the campus of Notre Dame, where there is the grotto of the apparition of Our Lady of Lourdes by St. Bernadette Subaru, whose statue is right there. So a number of guys in the class, including me, really took that kind of personally and offensively and challenged him in class. 2 of these guys, these 2 twins from Boston, actually stormed out of the class. So, yeah, it was kind of interesting. My lifespan, as many people in their early 50s, really was as things started to come apart. At the early part of our lives, things were still pretty cohesive of our, educational lives. And by the time we got to the ends of our education, when we were 22, everything had really fallen to pieces.
Wow. How was Notre Dame back then compared to how it is today, would you say?
It's kind of an interesting mix. I mean, I think there are probably a little more, I think there's probably a more faithful remnant, emphasis on faithful, compared to when I was there. I was there in the early 80s, 1979 to 1983. You never heard anything on campus about, holy hours or, adoration there was just no talk of it. Or if there was, I never heard it. Maybe there was, but, I never heard it. The masses in the dorms, which, I've gone back there, some friends have, some of their family, their sons or daughters are there, and I've gone back for football weekends with some regularity and, just kind of explore those kinds of questions. And, when I go back for reunions and that kind of thing. On the official level at Notre Dame, I don't think much has changed at all. As a matter of fact, in some ways, it's gotten worse. But to counter that, among the students, there are many students there who are much more orthodox than practically anybody that I remember when I was there. I mean, I kind of had friends, because I switched majors from accounting to communications, so I had friends in different dorms all over campus, and I never had any experience anywhere of, there was sort of the orthodox crowd of, mass attending students over in that dorm, or that just didn't exist. Now there are a couple of the dorms at Notre Dame that are like that, but still, while it's improving, it's got a heck of a long way to go among the students and officially with the faculty and the university, the university officials and things. For them to even pretend they care about the faith is laughable.
Right, right. I went to Notre Dame quite a bit later than you did, and of course, I went to the law school, which tends to be a little bit more solid than the rest of the campus. At least when I went there, of course, we got Professor Rice.
I was going to say you had Charlie Rice there then,
yeah,
right?
he was wonderful, and a fresh crop of new professors too, who are really solid. So I was fortunate in that I actually came back to the faith at Notre Dame, but I don't know. I mean, the rest of the campus, I wasn't as familiar with it, but. Fortunately, that was before they honored Obama, to their eternal shame. But anyway, so you leave Notre Dame, and then didn't you decide to go to seminary for a little bit?
Well, yeah, I had a brief stint there. When I left before seminary, I got a job at CBS in New York, and I was working as a broadcast associate, which is kind of a glorified script runner, a couple of other, menial jobs like that. At 60 Minutes and CBS Morning News back in the day with Bill Curtis and Diane Sawyer, in case some of your listeners recognize that time frame. I worked on Campaign 84, which was Reagan-Mondale, covering that, worked in the political numbers crunching unit for a while. So I had a good experience around there, as far as kind of an introduction to this whole crazy world of communications. And I went out and spent some time in affiliate land. I was an anchor and reporter and producer in some smaller markets. And then I came back to New York, and I was back visiting, and I was in St. Patrick's Cathedral for Good Friday, and Cardinal John O'Connor, God rest his soul, what a great holy man, was giving his reflections on the 7 words from the cross on Good Friday. And I was sitting, I know exactly where I was sitting. Every time I visit St. Patrick's, I go sit in that seat. And I went there and listened to him give his reflection, and I just had this really big emotional moment and decided I think I'm supposed to be a priest. So I applied for seminary then. That was in April, the Good Friday, and got accepted the following September. And I was in seminary for 2 years. I took a year off to decide whether to go back or not. At the end of the year, I was still kind of undecided what I should do. And the rector of the seminary said, well, if you're still undecided, then you should probably take more time off. You don't want to come in here and kind of discern that. You want to come in and, discern whether you're capable of doing it, not whether you want to do it, meaning be a priest. So that kind of was the end of it for me with regard to priesthood. I went back into, a short while later, I got back into television news and had a job up in Albany, New York. And then I came out here to Detroit and began working with the station that eventually became the Fox News affiliate. It was at the time the CBS station. So I had you might want to say a kind of a 2.5 or 3 year religious interruption in my career in television and broadcast. So it was kind of an odd time though. The seminary experience was. It certainly wasn't this wild heterodox type thing, but as I look back on it now and think about it, almost a good percentage of the priests that taught us left the priesthood. The first year was kind of a formation year, and the fellow who was, I won't bother saying his name, but the fellow who was in charge of that formation year for us, something just seemed a bit odd. I couldn't put my finger on it, but he was just a smooth guy, if you know what I mean. He was just kind of a smooth guy. And he wound up leaving the priesthood and getting married. And then one of the guys who was our liturgy instructor in seminary, I remember this scene very explicitly, especially now, the work I'm doing. I'd forgotten about it until I got into all of this. And he said that the whole Eucharistic prayer was consecratory, that there was no special moment in the Eucharistic prayer.
Wow.
And he was our liturgy guy, and he was very insistent about this. And I remember one of the guys who is now an ordained priest in the Archdiocese of New York I was friends with, he and I have actually laughed about this now in these last few years. He remembers, I said, well, do you remember you put your hand up and said, well, why does the Pope genuflect then at that particular moment if all of the moments in the Eucharistic prayer are special? And the priest gave some kind of blow-off, fluffy answer. And my friend, who is now the priest, said, well, if it's good enough for the Pope, it's good enough for me. But that priest wound up leaving and getting married, too. So It was and I do remember our first year in seminary, there was this great emphasis on Karl Rahner. And, we were constantly poring over Sacramentum Mundi, which is the big kind of compilation of all Karl Rahner's works. And now looking back on it, I'm like, red flags all over the place. But in there, you just had these moments like, that sounds odd, or Now, in deference to the seminary, because a lot of people know it's St. Joseph's Seminary for the Archdiocese of New York, we also had really good professors like Monsignor William Smith, who was top flight, absolute top flight. He was old school church, and boy, you knew right from wrong when you walked out of his morality class. But it was interesting because that seminary, St. Joseph's Seminary, was really considered kind of the West Point of seminaries in New York. First of all, it's the seminary closest to West Point geographically, but it also had that whole kind of, this is New York, and everything in New York must be just so-so. So it had that reputation, but looking back on it now, I'm like, wow, that's actually kind of amazing, because the good guys you remembered, and I remember a lot of their classes. I actually use some of their notes in different programs and stuff now. I still have all my notes from seminary 28, 6, 5, whatever years ago. And they're still very good notes. But some of these other guys, you're like, wow, these guys. Some of these guys are kind of wackadoodles. You weren't really quite sure, where they were coming from. And we didn't have the wherewithal because we really had very, very poor catechetical training. We most of us in seminary, I could probably speak for most of the class. Most of us in seminary, that first year formation and first year theology, knew probably not much more about the faith than what we had learned up to confirmation in 8th grade, and that was it. So something would strike us as that sounds weird or that sounds wrong, but we didn't have anywhere near the intellectual firepower we would have needed to combat what was being said. I mean, you just think, well, so for example, my priest friend there, he said, well, if the Pope kneels there, that's good enough for me. I mean, that's more of a reaction, less from the intellect and more from sort of a piety and a devotion, which is still a valid source of information. But, you can't argue back with a guy, who's sitting there with all these letters after his name and stacks of books that he's written and everything else, because you don't know what to say to him. And I think that's the experience of a lot of Catholics today, not necessarily men studying for the priesthood, although that too. But I think that's the experience of many Catholics today in the pews. They see fathers say this or they see sister do that, and there's something inside them, grace, tells them what you're seeing is wrong, but you don't know how to defend it or how to promote what the truth is. And that's a serious problem in the church today.
Right. They have enough of the sensus Catholicus to know there's something wrong, but they don't know their faith well enough.
Exactly.
To explain why. So you decide to leave seminary, and then you start getting into some trouble.
Well, that's a polite way of saying it. Yeah, we'll spare the we'll spare
the gory details.
Spare the gory details. But if anybody in your audience, your listening audience, is familiar with the story of Augustine and his mother Saint Monica, you can just substitute the names for my mother and me.
Right.
I think you get the picture.
Right.
But, TV is an easy place to fall into the sins of the flesh just because of the nature of what the business is and all of that kind of thing. So I like many others, took my route down that particular path, and you just kind of fall away from things, I guess, for a while.
I'm assuming it wasn't immediate.
I wouldn't say it was immediate. I would say it was. How would you characterize it? It was gradual, but not without speed. You come out and it's very easy, when you don't really have a sense of yourself. And I didn't have a sense of myself when I came out of seminary and I was 28, I think it was. Yeah, 28, 29, 28 and a half. And, I don't know that, there was really anything that had happened in my previous life that had sort of forced me to stand up and own up and, become a man. So, you just sort of go with whatever the particular winds and waves are that are blowing you at the time, that you're subject to at the time. And, I got back into TV, and, the whole industry, you'll find very few virtuous souls in the world of media, particularly news. And, the people that are looked up to are the people that generally have either the most bawdy mouths or the most lax morals, or they're kind of the celebrated ones because there's a lot of egoism in the business, and and back in the day, this isn't so much true today because people have such access to information on their own thanks to the internet. But, in the early 1990s, you had this feeling of kind of a position of power, that you knew all of these different things that other people didn't know. And, you as an industry were sort of, come down from Mount Olympus every day for the 5 or 6 o'clock news and deliver to the world what you had all determined was worthy of the world to be heard. And, and that particular style of work really feeds into a type of psychology where you become very just kind of, it's all about me, and whatever your particular vice or vices are, you're happy to engage in them. So it was certainly, I never kind of went through any sort of rejection of the faith. I never said, oh, I'm going to become Baptist or anything like that. I always knew in my sort of long, drawn-out course of, evil living that the basic things that I knew from my mom and dad and grammar school about the faith, I always knew those things were true, but I just didn't have the intestinal fortitude to stand up and live them. And it was much easier to just go live off in a life of sin, and that's what I did. I mean, it was very easy to do, and this is when I do these Vortex episodes on lack of masculinity. I'm not reading that from a book.
Right.
I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I know the effects of it too. They're very damaging effects.
Yeah. Now, as far as your career, though, you were pretty successful. You won 4 Emmys.
Yeah, the career was always fine. Or I would be one of those sort of typical cases, or mine would be one of those typical cases where, you'd look at everything from the outside and think, wow, there was a point here in Detroit where I think it was either between 93 and 94 or 94 and 95, where I won more awards for journalism than any producer had won up to that time in the whole Detroit and Midwest market. So I don't know if that's still the case. I haven't kept track of it. It's one of those, it's one of those records that's kind of interesting at the time, and then you get up the next morning and no one cares. I can tell you, no one cared, and when it was my bosses doling out pay raises, I can tell you they didn't care.
Now, I'm actually curious, what particular presentations did you do that won those Emmys? Was it for investigative journalism?
Yeah, they were all investigative journalism, as a matter of fact. They were... It's one of those things. It's funny when I think about what we do now here to some degree here at Church Militant. There's something of a dovetail there, and that was never intended. We never had the idea in our minds that we were going to be doing, investigative type stuff, but it's just fallen our way given the condition of the church. And you learn to think almost with a legal mind. Of asking, even when I'm sitting here trying to train up some of the younger folks here in our programming department who produce these wonderful dispatch episodes and, our FBI programs and our CIA programs.
Yeah, those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, they do a really good job, and it's interesting as I listen to myself sort of helping them along on what you need to do and here's how you need to think. It really is a way of thinking where you have to be, you have to ask a million questions of, whatever the subject matter is. If somebody says, oh, I heard this, or oh, I heard that, well, it's like, okay, well, who did you hear it from? And what was the context you heard it from? And you almost have to, as every piece of information comes to you in one of these things, in your mind, you personify that piece of information and put it on the stand, in a courtroom, and you question it. And that's how that's really what my experience was. I mean, I started off at 60 Minutes, and I heard those kind of I wasn't part of them. I wasn't a party to them, but I was certainly, hearing them in the production meetings and things like that. And the thoroughness of the thought, it really is amazing in journalism. If you've got good journalists who have a lot of integrity with regard to how they exercise their profession, their political leanings lack something to be desired, but the actual tools, the mental tools of what they need to have to be successful really is a very strong legal mind. And my last 2 years in news, while I was still a salary employee doing news, I did some freelance after I left. Those jobs were I met with the station attorneys on every single story that we did. And they tore the script apart, every single question by question by question by question. Are you sure this is the right name? Is it spelled right? Down to the the minutest detail, because they were always assessing whether there was an idea of being sued.
Right.
And so they were always concerned about the legal ramifications of those sorts of things. So those have always extended into, in a sense, perhaps not my spiritual life until more recently, but certainly in my professional life, my personal life, even to a degree, your social life. If a friend tells you something or other, what are you always trying to get to? You're always trying to get to the truth.
Right.
What is it? What's this? What's that? Whatever it is. Why is my interest rate? Why is it doubled on my mortgage? Whatever the case is, you want to find out, what's the cause?
Right.
And that was. And that has certainly, reaped huge benefits. That past experience has reaped huge benefits here in what we do here.
Yeah. Now, all throughout this time during your career, I understand your mother is praying for you. She's calling you. Tell us about that a little bit, your mom.
Yeah, she is. Her name was Anne Josephine Bernadette Leiden Voris. So any of your listeners, if you can please say a prayer for my mother. She was tenacious in the faith. And I have one sibling, Marshall, 7 years older than me. And he, for his reasons, had gone his way as well. Again, never rejecting the faith, but accommodating the faith. I guess that's the best way to think about it. I think we both accommodated the faith to what we wanted it to be. And as such, we were both bad Catholics. Leaving my brother aside, because that's his story. This was a great source of distress to both my parents. My mom and my dad were greatly distressed by this. My mom was just the one who was more vocal about it. So she'd be on the phone every night when she knew it was, I used to work the 11 o'clock news, so we'd get off at 11:30 frequently in my career, not all the time, but for large parts of my career. You get off at 11:30 at night, 11:35. It's 11:45 now. You've got your coat on, everything's ready to go. And what time is it in the life of a 30-year-old single guy? When it's 11:45 or midnight,
Day is just getting started.
The day is just getting started. That's exactly right. And and that's another thing. This is one of the things when I say news is a very difficult industry to stay pure in, because almost any sort of regular bar that we would go to, they would know who we were, and they wanted to be with all the cool guys from the news and all of that. So they'd chase all their customers out, at 2 o'clock or closing time, and they'd let us stay. And they'd lock the doors, and we'd be in there. So, you develop some very bad habits very quickly. It's not just drinking, but it's everything that comes along with that lifestyle of, drinking and carousing and across the board. So it was my mom knew all this. She was no dummy. She'd call sometimes at like midnight, thinking, because I only lived 10 minutes from the station, I'm supposed to be home, because that's what a reasonable, responsible young fellow does. Well, she'd call at midnight, and she'd call again at like 12:20, and then again at 1:45, and she wasn't going to get me for another 3 or 4 hours. So she'd leave these long messages on my machine, you shouldn't be staying out late like that, and then she'd quote some of the Irish sayings, from midnight to 6 a.m. is the devil's time. There's nothing going on except the devil's work goes out. And she was right. I mean, she was right, but it was just the deliberateness with which she would say these things. And I tell people lots of times, if you think the vortex is bad, you should listen to the mother vortex.
My kind of woman.
Oh yeah, she was a protector, that's for sure. And So anyway, she was praying and praying. This went on for years, Christine, years and years, for, I guess, I don't know, probably 13 years, 14 years, somewhere in that neighborhood. She was praying and praying and praying, and she finally got fed up one day because nothing was changing. I mean, she was sending me, just to give your listeners another, understand the extent of her concern, at least once a week, something would roll up in the mail for me that every week, 52 weeks a year. That was either a holy card or a miraculous medal or, a little prayer book or, the life of a saint or just on and on and on, continually nonstop stuff like that. And all this time, of course, she's praying like crazy. Nothing's happening. So she finally just sort of throws her arms up and, probably knowing my mom, a bit of anger at God and saying, I give up. I give up. I don't care what you have to do to me. Do whatever you have to do to me, but spare the eternal lives of my two sons. And that really was kind of the trigger moment. A couple of weeks, 3 weeks after that, she was going in for something else unrelated, and they found stomach cancer, the very early beginnings of stomach cancer. And they performed surgery a couple of weeks later, beginning of October. This was 2001. And they said they got it all and everything was fine. By July of the next year, it was back, metastasized all over the place, stage 4. And they told her that she had about 2 months left to live, to maybe 3 on the outside. So I was in Detroit. My parents were in New York. My mom was a patient at Sloan Kettering. And she went to, they told me this. And I said, well, Dad, you and Mom got to move out here to Detroit. By this time, I had left news and I'd started my own business. I was producing commercials for General Motors. And I said, I can't leave. I am the business. So, you guys need to come out here so I can help you take care of Mom, Dad. And then after Mom dies, you'll be out here with me already. So they did. They packed up. They moved. They were here in 2 weeks. My dad was like a little quiet St. Joseph. He just set about his work, sold the house, got rid of the furniture, did everything in 2 weeks flat, and was on the plane coming out here. So I got, everything set up on my end, ready for them. And then my mom just kept living. She lived for almost 2 years. And but in the middle of those 2 years, my brother died of a heart attack, Marshall, with no advance notice, nothing. He was a pretty accomplished athlete, amateur athlete, but he missed the swimming team, the U.S. Olympic swimming team, when he was in high school by like 2 or 3 spots. And he loved swimming. That's why he and his wife moved to Corpus Christi, Texas, so he could swim out in the Gulf every day. So for him to die of a heart attack was, first of all, he was young anyway at 48, but he had no indications whatsoever of anything ever having gone wrong. So that was quite the shock. And it was really then I went down to the funeral, to my brother's funeral. My mom and dad obviously couldn't travel because of my mom's health. So I went down to the funeral. This was in August of 2003. And walking up to my brother's body was really, that was just such a jarring moment. Really, so I called my mom when I was standing over his body and asked her if she wanted me to say anything or do anything. And my mom said, yeah, give him a kiss for me and tell him I love him and I hope to see him soon. And that was it. Right then, everything I had learned back from Sister Bernadette and everything else just came flooding in. That all that stuff that I'd learned when I was a kid was all true. People die. Your life comes to an end here. It's over. Here's my brother's cold, dead body in front of me, and here's my mom, within some weeks or months of dying on the other end of the phone. My whole family, with the exception of my dad, was dead or gonna be dead. And that's when I went back to Detroit and now started having the really serious conversations with my mom. It took my brother's death really to kind of, clear everything out of the path for my mom to be able to start talking to me seriously. Because even before that, it was, obviously you have the human emotional thing that an atheist can have when, his mom is dying. But, on all the moral front and everything, it was just a horrible vices that I'd fallen into, and there was really sort of no getting out. And now this was it. This was kind of the path and the way out. So, and my mom talked me, prayed me, talked me back into the faith until she died in June 15th. We're coming up on her next weekend. Is her 2 weekends from now is her 10-year anniversary of her being dead.
Could you talk about that moment when you mentioned those words that she said to you that struck you?
Yeah, well, actually, there were 3 different times of that, 3 different sets of words. She said to me one time, she told me, I didn't know when she got cancer. I didn't even know until she got out here that she had prayed to our Lord, do whatever you have to do to me, but spare the eternal lives of my 2 sons. I didn't know that prayer had ever been uttered. I think she told me that like 3 or 4 months before she died. It was very long down in the process when she revealed that to me. And I presume as a mom, she didn't want to have me think I was responsible for this, so she kept that information close to her as much as, as much as she could until she felt the need to share it, felt the time to share it. So that was one thing. Another thing she said to me, probably, I guess this was about a month and a half or so, maybe before she died, she said, "I don't want to be in heaven knowing you're in hell." And that's a very jarring thing to have your dying mother say to you. And she was laying there on the couch with her hand over her stomach. It was stomach cancer she had, and it had spread through to her abdomen and, her liver and a couple other places it was showing up also. She was in hospice care at this point. And the pain in her stomach was really dreadful. It was really dreadful. She either didn't have much of it when I was around or when I was visiting, or masked it very well, or both. But my dad told me there were occasions where she would just be yelping in pain. She used to describe it as like 1,000 pieces of glass, shards of glass just churning around in her stomach, constantly cutting it up. And it was just horrible, horrible pain. And, they were able to and cause it to be subsided somewhat with the various hospice medications. But, it was one of those, you kind of have to be there with the pill and the drops under your tongue and everything at the right time, or because once it gets going, it takes a while to, get it to subside. And it was from that context, laying there on the couch in that kind of, hurt. I remember her rubbing her stomach pretty intensely, her abdomen, when she said that to me, "I don't want to be in heaven knowing you're in hell." And a little, probably 2 or 3 weeks later, she said to me, so this would have been within a month before she died, she said, "Jesus has something very special in store for you. I don't know what it is, but I know that he has something it's very special in store for you. You're very special to him. And I just want to let you know that you need to say this prayer. Don't say it until you know you're ready to say it and you mean it. But when you're ready, say, 'Holy Spirit, command me to do your will.'" And that's all you have to pray. And, of course, I'm sitting thinking to myself when she's saying all this stuff, what on earth is she talking about? I'm not very special to Jesus, no more special than anybody else, and had no idea about this Holy Spirit thing, but probably about within 2 or 3, maybe into the 4th month after she died, because that was a very rough thing. I mean, my mom and I, there's an expression in Irish culture that you go the rounds of the kitchen. It's, you're yelling and screaming at each other all the time and stuff. My mom and I had that because, I was the last boy at home, and my mom was trying to, protect her baby and all that stuff. And the last thing a 15, 16-year-old boy wants to be is mothered.
Right.
So, we used to go the rounds of the kitchen quite a bit, but we also were very, 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 very loving with regard to each other, had a very deep love for each other. So when she died, it was I got really knocked back on my heels, much more so than I thought I would be. I mean, I knew I was going to be, greatly saddened and kind of out of commission, but I was really emotionally and spiritually out of commission for about 2 months. I remember the thoughts coming to me, the kind of temptations of doubt coming to me that, well, you'll never see her again. There is no God. All that stuff is made up. And I remember driving back one time when that thought came to me, and I had to grit my teeth, and I was bawling, gritting my teeth through that thought, just fighting and yelling, "Get away from me. Don't get away from me," with that thought. It was horrible. And then that one kind of subsided, and the next one that came up right on the heels of it and lasted for a week or two. Well, I need to preface this. Very frequently, the dying in hospice don't want anything on them. They don't want, necklaces on or rings on their fingers or, crosses, even little bitty ones around their neck or everything. They're as they begin to approach the actively dying, their skin, this is what the nurses were telling us, the organ of their skin becomes very sensitive. So anything touching it at all actually causes them some pain. Or can cause them pain. And the same is true of any sort of noise. Their hearing becomes wildly acute. Any odors at all in the room of perfume or cologne is really very repugnant to them because for whatever reason, that's what the body's going through there as it begins actively dying. So my mom had asked my dad, when she was in the hospice bed, probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 days before she died, if he could take her scapular off and just put it over on the side of the side of the bed because it was bothering her. It was causing her to be very itchy and making her very uncomfortable. So could she take it off? Could he take it off? And he did. He had it there by the side of the bed. Somewhere in those 2 or 3 days, it got moved, and I didn't notice where it gotten moved to. So the night my mom died, the early morning, it was about 5:30 in the morning is when she died. About an hour beforehand, she started going through the actual, death process. And when it became clear to me that that's what was going on, I ran down the hall and got the nurse, and she came back into the room and she said, "Yes, she's dying now. It won't be very long." So I started running around in her room in the hospice looking for her scapular for her, and I couldn't find it. I was looking everywhere under the bed. I'm like, did it get knocked down? It was over here all these days. Where is it? And anyway, I finally found it, and I lifted my mom up to put it around her, but she had already started to go cold. And I wasn't sure in my mind if she had already died at that moment or just had a little teeny bit of life left in her. But nonetheless, what's going through my mind after she died, the second wave of temptation was, your mom's in hell because you didn't get that scapular on her because you're a horrible son and da-da-da-da-da and all that. And yeah, so I got put through the ringer by the diabolical with my mom's death. It was really very difficult for me to rebound from it because of those things. And so after all of that kind of subsided for probably, like I said, probably 3 months or so later, I began to kind of spiritually equalize. And I went to the tabernacle in my parish in the middle of a weekday afternoon. I knelt down in front of the tabernacle, and I just had the sense that I should make that prayer. So I said, "Holy Spirit, command me to do your will." And I went over to the statue of Our Lady, just off to the left, and I pledged my chastity to her, lifelong chastity to her. And there wasn't like a great big magic moment. Angels didn't bust out singing, or there were no glorias echoing around the church or anything, but I knew then, I was in resolve that I had to do something about, I had to do something for the church. I didn't know what. I had no idea. I was still producing commercials for General Motors. So I kept doing that. I was doing that at the same time. There was a transition period of about, I guess it was probably 18 months while we were doing the St. Michael's One True Faith programming, and I was still doing the St. Michael's Media, the General Motors work. And but it was really the kind of cause of everything here at St. Michael's Media was the book and the movie, The Da Vinci Code. I had come back at that year between my mom dying and the Da Vinci Code was I read about 10,000 pages of the faith. I couldn't. It's like everything that I hadn't gotten that I should have gotten all those previous years were crammed into that 1 year. And I couldn't stop reading. Every single thing I could get my hands on, I read. It just dozens and dozens and dozens of books, just nonstop. That's how I stopped doing what I was doing after work and all of that. I'd sit on planes flying to General Motors shoots all over the world, reading everything. Bishop Sheen, Peter Kraft, everything I could get my hands on, I would read. And so at the end of that year, and it was bothering me a lot. I'm like, I need to be able to do something for the faith. I need to be able to do something for the church. And the moment came when that Da Vinci Code stupidity happened, and I said to my dad, "Aha, Dad, I figured it out. I know what to do. I'm gonna." I'd saved up a good deal of money. My mom had left me some money when she died, so I said, I'm going to make a production, because I was in TV, so that seemed like a natural thing to do. I said, I'm going to make a movie. I'm going to make a documentary, half-hour documentary about the errors of the Da Vinci Code. I'll use my own money. I've already got my own cameras and everything. And I'll buy time on local stations, and I'll put it on, and we'll rip it to pieces. They have no right to assail the church with that, that Dan Brown garbage and all of this. So, and then about a day or two later, I realized, well, by the time I get this done, I sat down to start writing it, and as I got closer and closer to actually putting words on paper, or digits on a computer screen, I realized this isn't going to do anything. It was very frustrating because I thought, well, there's no way I'll be able to get this done, pre-produced, produced, and post-produced, and then have time bought on local TV to then get it up to, have it have any kind of impact at all. I mean, people will have forgotten the Da Vinci Code even existed by the time they see this. So I said to my dad, I'm not going to make a one-off production. We got to do a daily thing. I've got to do there's got to be something that, is the continual drumbeat against the culture, because, it's the culture and the lack of catechesis among Catholics, not knowing the faith, that has led to all of this. So it was just so funny. I remember I was doing a lot of traveling for General Motors that year. And I remember every single airport I was in, every plane I was on, sitting at the gates waiting for the planes, everybody was reading the Da Vinci Code. Everybody. And my blood was boiling. That they were, that all of this filth was being poured into their minds and their souls, and I couldn't do anything about it. So that's how St. Michael's Media came about, and Real Catholic TV / Church Militant TV is just an extension of it on the internet.
Right, and you started out first with the One True Faith series.
Yes, yeah, we've shot 100 and I think it's like 118 hours of that. Each show is an hour. Those were really they were fun to do. We did them in front of live audiences or studio audiences, and I'd love to do those again. It's just, it's really funny, Christine, because I look back now and think to myself, I remember, wow, we were really, really busy back then. And I look back and go, busy with what? We're doing work now with a staff of 26 people. We used to have, I think it was probably 4 or 5, and then some volunteers. And I used to think we were buried then with work, and that was a walk in the park compared to now.
Well, it's an excellent series. I highly recommend it to my listeners. Wow, beautiful story about your mother. God bless her.
Yeah, God bless her. She's in heaven. She's in heaven.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Let's turn for a moment to the issue of authentic masculinity. You've touched on this a lot in various Vortex episodes or talks. And, there seems to be a crisis of manhood in the world today. A lot of grown men don't know what it is to be a man. Lots of fatherless families, kids growing up without their dads, or, men being really passive, not taking part in the life of the family. I was just actually read it today, Southern Baptists just published these results from research they had done. And apparently, if a child is the first in the family to convert to Christianity, there's only a 3.7% probability that the rest of the family will also convert. If the mom is the first to convert, there's only a 17% chance that the rest of the family will convert. But if the dad is the first in the family to become a Christian, there is a 93% chance that the rest of the family will follow. So obviously, dads, just men in general have a huge role to play, crucial role in the formation of families. And it seems a lot of men are abdicating that responsibility, or they don't understand the responsibility. Would you say that, we see it in the world, would you say that that's also a problem in the church?
Hands down. Matter of fact, I believe personally that is the problem in the church. That, look, the bishops and the other leaders in the church, lay leaders and chanceries in charge of this committee or that committee or whatever, they didn't create the crisis of sin and debauchery, of which I was a card-carrying member, that the society has become. But they have certainly permitted it and encouraged it by their silence, and they haven't viewed or haven't properly understood, or have understood but don't have the courage to stand up and defend their children. They don't see their roles that way. I'm kind of confused why they don't. You walk up to them and say, "Good afternoon, Father," but they don't seem to. There doesn't seem to be a translation there. It is treated more as this kind of honorific title, and that's the end of it, without the sense of what it's being, what it's connected to in reality. The name Father is just a symbol that points to the reality of you are, our spiritual paternal guide to heaven. And, obviously the priesthood, the fullness of the priesthood resides in the office of bishop. And, so many of them just don't seem to see that. And if they do see it, they don't act on it. We just had a press conference here last week from the Archbishop of Detroit, who, thank God, has come out publicly and said, I, meaning the Archbishop, I need to change the culture of this diocese. He's saying that in response to a survey that the Archdiocese did in connection with the upcoming October Synod at the Vatican, Synod on the Family and Marriage and the Family, that showed since the year 2000, I mean, you're talking less than 14 years, a 50% decrease in the sacramental life in the Archdiocese of Detroit. 50%. I mean, you go another 14 years, 13 years, and, that means that you will have, the numbers were already low to begin with. You'll now be down to, take another 50% off the remaining 50%. You're down to a quarter of what it was just essentially less than 30 years earlier. I mean, that's phenomenal. Thank God Archbishop Vigneron would, publicly step in front of a microphone and say that. And then say, we got to change the way we do things here. I mean, good for him for, saying that. I hope he's able to follow through with it and do the right thing. Right. But he is he and other bishops are faced with this dilemma. When you look at the bishops who are sort of in their, I don't know, you would say kind of, just to use an arbitrary but somewhat significant cutoff point, a bishop who is 60 years or older, for the most part, that bishop was raised in this whole Church of Nice garbage in seminary. They were in seminary in the late 70s, give or take, in that time frame. The 70s was the era of absolute upheaval when it got into the church. In the 60s, it was in the culture. It had already begun in the church, but it really kind of surfaced like a submarine and showed its full wares in the 1970s in America. And many of these bishops were in seminary right in that time moment. Some of the younger bishops that I know that are under 60, that I have a very good relationship with, they recognize this, but they're still massively outnumbered. They try to do what they can, but, there's the present-day bishops, 60 and over, roughly speaking, they've been schooled that here is how you be a bishop. And you be a bishop by never upsetting the status quo, never getting anybody mad, keeping everybody happy. That's not how a father runs a family. A father doesn't sit there and try to, allow, just 3 burglars into his house as opposed to the 10 who want to get in so he can keep his family happy and the burglars happy. You don't let the drug dealers or the pornography dealers, just come around just on one day a week. I mean, I don't think they understand because I don't think it was ever told to them. I mean, I don't say that as an excuse for them. I just say that, they need to step up and, realize that their role is to protect these souls and get them to heaven, and their eternal salvations depend on that. That's what they're ordained and consecrated for, made a bishop for. And we just finished shooting the Wisdom of the Fathers series. It'll be running, I think, second or third or fourth quarter this year. The last one we just did was St. Leo the Great, Pope St. Leo the Great. I mean, here's a man who came in, kicked down the doors, kicked what, and took names. And he purified the church. Was it perfect? No. But he got rid of heresies and the people causing the heresies. And, I think today a bishop should just give up his staff and pick up a blowtorch. That's what they need to do. And it's just not in the constitution of manliness anymore, in the culture, which of course has an effect on the church. Men are seen as, these kind of drivelly, non-combative, mushy mouth, keep the peace kind of thing. And that's not the role of a leader. The role of a leader is not to keep the peace. The role of a leader is to get to the accomplished goal, whatever the goal is, to reach the end. And if people have to be thrown off one side of the ship or the other because they're preventing that goal from happening, well, then you throw them off. You don't sacrifice the large for the sake of the few. You leave the few to God, and you hope they do whatever, but you move on. You get on with your life, and you get on with what you got to do, and that's just not the end. That's a manly attitude. It's a manly approach to things. That I have to get this ship into its safe port, and whatever I need to do that is what I'm going to do.
Exactly. Yeah, you've spoken about the imbalance between the masculine approach versus the feminine approach in the past 50 years in the church. I actually want to share an anecdote with you and then get your feedback on this, because I think for me it was the perfect. I witnessed the feminine versus the masculine approach with my own eyes, and I kind of thought this is exactly what has happened in the church in the past 50 years. But anyway, I was in a Catholic study group a few years back, and one of the ladies there, a very nice lady, brought up the silly claim that the miracle of the fishes and loaves was not a real miracle, but the real miracle was that they shared. Okay, how nice. And there were two men in the group, and they immediately spoke up. They shot that down. They said, nope, that's wrong. It was a true miracle, and what you said is wrong. Immediately, they drew lines, they confronted, they protected the truth, no problem. The women, it was really interesting, they either sat in uncomfortable silence or they tried to change the subject. One of the women even was like, enough, let's change the subject, she said. So I was the only woman in the group who actually chimed in with the guys. And so I was thinking about that. I thought, wow, do you think that this is kind of writ large is what has happened in the church today? There's not enough leaders in the church standing up and defending the truth and drawing clear lines.
Oh, I think that's absolutely. I mean, why is there a failure to? You might imagine in the course of us doing business over the course of a day, the work we're engaged in, we hear from. I could open up my email right now and read to you 10 different emails I've gotten today from people who have all kinds of stories just like that one. Some of them are with priests who tell them, you got to be nice and don't be mean and this and that and everything else. And it is very, how do you say it? It's so prevalent that it's just accepted as the only way to do business is to just make sure you make the appeal on an emotional level. Don't do anything, that ever upsets the boat or, causes too much controversy or anything like that. And it is if you were to say sort of in general, what are the characteristics that define masculine? And masculine, sacrifices itself and draws distinctions, even at the cost of its own life, for the protection of the community. The feminine really is about protecting the integrity and the unity of the community. So the masculine draws distinctions, very hard, clear, bright line distinctions, so it can be aware of what the dangers are. While and sometimes, obviously, that can go too far sometimes. But likewise, the idea of the feminine being, so concentrated on unity and keeping the peace that it will let some things, it will do that sometimes at the cost of truth and those necessary distinctions. The feminine has to keep its role in balance within itself. The masculine has to keep its role in balance within itself. And the two of those, each of those, have to be in proper relation to each other. The truth comes first, because the truth ultimately is about charity, and being nice isn't charitable if it's coming at the service at the cost of the truth. And that is the overwhelming problem in the church these days. There is this worship at the altar of feelings with no regard, or so little regard there may as well be no regard for the truth. Because the truth hurts, and it means people have to change their lives, and they don't like hearing it. Nobody likes it. I didn't like hearing it when my mom was on the phone with me. I didn't like it when every day I'd open up the mail, or 2 or 3 times a week, and there'd be a holy card in there, or a prayer, whatever. I didn't like seeing all that stuff. I used to be like, "Arr," and then move on. So that's what it is. You tell people the truth in this life, so they hopefully can conform themselves to it. Or they have to deal with it in the next life. There isn't an escape from the truth. There is a delay. There's never an escape.
Amen. All right, well, we're coming to the close of the hour, but for those listening today who say that you're all doom and gloom and you never offer any positive solutions, what is your best advice to laity in combating the crisis in the church?
I think that's on a 2-level thing. First of all, to address the doom and gloom thing, it is certainly not doom and gloom to simply point at the coming storm and see tornadoes bobbing up and down and flashes of lightning and then say, oh, look, there's a tornado coming and our whole town is going to be wiped out if we don't get into the cellars. That's not being doom and gloom. That's being realistic. The doom and gloom is the storm coming your way. You sounding the alarm isn't doom and gloom. Right. So how do you get into the cellars? Well, the very first and the only thing that anyone can actually do, that they have full 100% control over, is the integrity of their own souls and faith life. You have to pray. You have to be true men and women of God, sons of God, in our holiness, in our desire for wanting to be adopted sons of the Father. We have got to desire that. We've got to devote our lives to being holy. I mean, that's what heaven is. So, hell doesn't just begin for somebody. It begins in the next life. It's already begun on this earth. And likewise, heaven, obviously not in its fullness, begins in this life as well. We really, really, really have to work on our own personal sanctification. Beyond that, in addition to that, not exclusive of it, but out of that flows a love for the truth and our blessed Lord, who is the truth, and his church, who is him, his bride, one flesh. We must stand up and defend against the errors in the church right now. And I don't mean errors in the indestructible bride of Christ. I mean the errors on the ground by humans, the teaching these silly notions that nobody really goes to hell, and all you have to worry about is being nice, and the greatest problem in the world today is illegal immigration. And these things aren't the gospel. They sound like the gospel because they're dressed up like the gospel. They sound like the gospel because the people are preaching them either have miters or collars on or both, but they're not the gospel. Those gospel imperatives are about saving your soul first. And if everybody is actively working on saving their soul, 99% of those problems go away because people wouldn't treat other people poorly or badly, and they wouldn't be selfish or love money more than God or anything else. The results of what we see in the world today are the results of sin. All of these things going on. And the only way to combat sin is through personal holiness. That's it. There is no other way. You can't start a campaign to make sure the Constitution is properly defended or make sure the right piece of legislation gets put through. That's not how you combat sin. Those things that are needed, you need to correct things. I'm not saying, live in some willy-nilly world where, you don't ever do anything except just pray. That's not my point. It's not even what I'm saying. But what I am saying is everything we do has to come from that source and then flow out into those other areas. But what's going on in the church today, the Catholic Church today, is this great worshiping of the idea that we can combat these horrible sins and these awful things that have come from our sinful human nature through human means. You cannot combat sin through natural human means. You must combat it through supernatural means of being in a state of grace. And from that, you do everything that has to be your entire motivation. Everything you do must be to save your soul and and help with the saving of as many other souls as possible. That's the only thing that matters at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So where can listeners find your apostolate online?
Churchmilitant.tv. Churchmilitant.tv, not .com. There's no
That's right.
.tv.
.tv.
And
okay.
It's we're very happy with it. We're always trying to do our best. Sometimes we stumble and don't do things as well as we could have or something, but we may get low marks from our Lord for execution, but I hope at least we'll get good marks from him for effort.
Excellent. I highly recommend it to my listeners. I do not exaggerate when I say that I wouldn't even be doing this radio apostolate if I had not run into Michael and his work. It's excellent stuff. So, and it's a lot more than the Vortex. So, churchmilitant.tv. Thanks so much for talking with me today, Michael. It's a fascinating discussion, and may God continue to bless you and your apostolate.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the effort, and God bless you for all your work too, Christine.
Thank you. All right, signing off, I'm Christine Niles. Remember that you can find more about our network and access all our archived shows at forwardboldly.com. Please also check out our podcast at the Regina Magazine blog, found at blog.reginamag.com. Okay, my friends, keep fighting the good fight of the faith. And in the words of Saint Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly. Thank you.